My stepmother and half-brother laughed at me during my father's will reading, until the truth. Please stay with me as I tell my story. And please, do not forget to support our channel by subscribing to our channel, liking our videos, and sharing your loved one. Your support means the world to us. Now to our story. Poke. The air inside the lawyer's office felt thick, like it had been sitting there for years. The blinds were half closed, letting in thin strips of light that landed across the polished wooden table. I sat stiffly in the chair, hands clasped together, trying to keep my breathing steady. My father had been gone less than a month, and already I felt like the ground under me was cracking apart. Across from me, my stepmother leaned back in her seat, her perfume sharp and heavy in the room. She had dressed for the occasion in a fitted black dress, her lips painted dark red. Beside her, my half-brother barely looked up from his phone, his thumbs moving quickly over the screen. He smirked at something he read, not even pretending to be respectful. The lawyer, a tall man in a gray suit, cleared his throat and began to read. His voice was steady, professional, but the words hit me like blows. To my wife, I leave the family home, all assets, the business, and remaining accounts. He went on, naming each property, each account, each share, one by one, all going to them. My stepmother's painted nails tapped lightly against the table, like she was keeping time to the sound of my father giving her everything. When he finished, there was silence for a heartbeat. Then my half-brother gave a short laugh, low and mocking. He leaned toward his mother, whispering something I couldn't catch, but I knew it was about me. She laughed too, not the kind you hear at a joke, but the kind that says they've won and you've lost. I stared at the table, my stomach twisting. This was it. My father had left me nothing. No house. No savings. Not even a keepsake to remember him by. It wasn't about the money. It was the thought that he'd chosen them over me. That he'd turned his back after everything. My chest felt hollow, my hands cold. The lawyer started stacking his papers, and I stood slowly, still feeling the weight of their laughter pressing against me. I didn't want to give them the satisfaction of seeing me break, so I kept my face blank. My stepmother's smile grew as she glanced at me, and my half-brother's phone camera clicked once, like he'd just taken a picture. As I turned toward the door, I caught something, just for a moment. The lawyer's eyes met mine, and the corner of his mouth lifted in the smallest, almost unnoticeable smirk. It was gone in an instant, replaced by his usual professional mask. But it was enough to make me pause mid-step. Something about that look told me this wasn't over. Not yet. 6 months before my father died, things had already begun to change, though I didn't see how bad it was at first. Whenever I called to arrange a visit, my stepmother would answer. She always had a reason why it wasn't a good time. He was resting, he had meetings, he wasn't feeling well. At first, I believed her, but after a while, it felt like she was guarding him. When I did manage to see him, it was never just the two of us. She would stay in the room, hovering by the doorway or pretending to tidy up, her eyes following every word we spoke. My father didn't talk the same. He used to fill the room with his voice, telling stories or asking about my life. Now, his words were shorter, his tone flat, and he seemed tired even in the middle of the day. Family dinners turned tense. My half-brother had a way of speaking to me that wasn't openly rude, but the meaning was always sharp. He'd make comments about how some people didn't understand business or how lucky certain family members were to even be part of the table. My father would stay quiet when he said these things, sometimes staring down at his plate like he didn't hear them. One night, I stopped by without calling first. I just wanted to see my father. When I knocked, my stepmother opened the door halfway, blocking the rest of the hallway with her body. She told me my father was busy. I asked if I could wait. Her eyes narrowed, and her voice got cold. She said I needed to stop showing up uninvited, that I was disrupting the peace in the house. I told her I only wanted to spend time with him, that I didn't understand why she was keeping me away. She didn't hide her anger then. She said, "Don't think I don't see what you're after. You want what's his. You're not fooling me." Before I could answer, she pushed the door shut so hard the frame rattled. I stood there for a while, staring at the wood, hearing footsteps on the other side. My hands felt hot with anger, but under it, there was something else, confusion. I didn't know how she could think that about me. Later that night, my phone rang. It was my father. His voice was soft, almost unsteady. He said he was sorry about what happened, that she had been under stress. He told me he wished things were easier, but his words were careful, like he was choosing them one at a time. There was a pause before he added, "Don't push her right now for your sake." When the call ended, I sat in the dark, trying to make sense of it. My father had never spoken like that before. It wasn't just the tiredness in his voice. It was something heavier, something that sounded almost like fear. When my father was admitted to the hospital, I went there as soon as I heard. The halls smelled faintly of disinfectant, and the soft beeping of machines came from every room. I walked quickly toward the nurse's station, But before I could even ask where his room was, my stepmother appeared from around the corner. She stepped right in front of me, blocking the path. Her voice was firm, but her eyes were cold. She said he wasn't feeling well enough for visitors, and that I should leave. When I tried to argue, she repeated herself, sharper this time, and added that it was doctor's orders. She placed a hand on my arm, guiding me back toward the exit. I pulled away, but she didn't move from the doorway to the hall where his room must have been. I left the building, but I didn't go far. I waited outside for almost an hour, watching through the glass as nurses came and went. Finally, a nurse I'd seen before noticed me. She glanced around, then stepped outside for a moment. In a low voice, she told me my father was awake but weak, and she didn't see a reason I couldn't visit him for a few minutes if I kept it short. She led me down the hall quickly, past the room numbers, until we reached his. The curtain was half drawn, and my father was lying in the bed, thinner than I remembered, his skin pale. When he saw me, his expression softened, but there was urgency in his eyes. I pulled a chair close, and he reached out with a trembling hand. He gripped my wrist tighter than I thought he could in his condition, then slowly turned his hand over mine. Something cold and small pressed into my palm. I looked down. It was an old brass key, worn smooth from years of use. He leaned toward me, his voice barely more than a whisper. "Keep it safe," he said, pausing to catch his breath. "They'll never see it coming." Before I could ask what he meant, footsteps sounded in the hallway. My stepmother's voice cut through the air, sharp and impatient. The nurse straightened, and my father closed his eyes like he didn't want her to see him speaking to me. She swept into the room, her heels clicking on the tile. Her gaze went straight to me, and her lips pressed into a thin line. "Your time's up," she said, not even looking at my father. She stood there until I stood, her eyes never leaving mine. I slipped the key into my pocket before she could notice, gave my father one last look, and walked out. The nurse followed me to the door, but neither of us spoke. The weight of the key in my pocket felt heavier with every step. I walked out of the lawyer's office without saying a word. The building's glass doors closed behind me, and the sound of traffic felt distant, like I was underwater. My face was hot, but my hands were cold. I didn't go home. Instead, I got into my car and just sat there. The steering wheel felt rough under my fingers, but I kept one hand in my pocket, holding the small brass key. Its edges dug into my palm. I turned it over slowly, staring at nothing, wondering what my father had meant that day in the hospital. What could this key possibly open? Why had he made it sound so important? A vibration on my phone pulled me back. A notification popped up, a social media post from my stepmother. I opened it, and there they were. Her and my half-brother sitting at a fancy restaurant, glasses of champagne raised high. The caption read, "New Beginnings." My half-brother's grin was wide, his arm thrown around her shoulders like they had just won a prize. I scrolled through the comments, friends congratulating them, telling them how happy they must be. Each word made my chest tighten. They didn't even wait a day to celebrate. My father's name wasn't mentioned once. It was like he'd never been more than a stepping stone for them. I put the phone face down on the passenger seat and started the engine, but I didn't drive toward home. My father's house, their house now, wasn't far. I knew they would be busy showing off, not thinking about what might still be inside. When I pulled up, the driveway was empty. The curtains were drawn, and the place looked still. I sat there for a few minutes, watching the front door, half expecting them to show up. But no one came. I thought about my father's old study, the one room he never let anyone else organize. Shelves of books lined the walls, and there had always been drawers and cabinets he kept locked. If the key meant anything, it would be there. I didn't know how long I'd have before the stepmother decided to start cleaning out his things, but I couldn't wait. I got out of the car, my feet crunching lightly on the gravel path. The air smelled faintly of the garden soil he used to tend. Unlocking the front door with my spare key felt strange. It could be the last time I'd ever use it. The hallway was dim, quiet except for the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. I headed straight for the study, my hand brushing the key in my pocket. The shelves looked untouched, but the large wooden cabinet in the corner caught my eye. Its lock was old and brass, matching the key's worn surface. I stepped closer, my fingers tightening around the metal, ready to see what my father had wanted me to find. It was close to midnight when I parked a street away from the house. The neighborhood was quiet, only the occasional sound of a dog barking in the distance. I kept the car lights off as I walked toward the driveway. The curtains were shut, no lights on inside. They were either out or asleep. My old house key slid into the front door's lock without resistance. I stepped inside, closing it gently behind me. The air smelled faintly of furniture polish, and the flowers my stepmother always kept in the hallway vase. I didn't stop to look around. My footsteps were quick but careful, heading straight to the study. The cabinet sat in the corner, just as I remembered. For years, I had seen my father open it only when he thought no one was watching. The brass lock was worn but solid. I took the key from my pocket, the one he had given me in the hospital. My hand shook slightly as I slid it in. It turned smoothly, like it had been waiting for this moment. Inside was a single wooden box, no bigger than a shoebox. I lifted it out and set it on the desk. When I opened the lid, the scent of old paper rose up. Inside were neatly stacked folders, a small envelope with my name written in my father's handwriting, and a black flash drive. I opened the envelope first. The paper inside was thick, official. My eyes scanned the first lines and my chest tightened. It was a will, but not the one read earlier that day. This one was dated months later, signed and witnessed. Every asset, house, accounts, business, was left to me. It was clear, direct, and legal. I set it down carefully and picked up the flash drive. There was a sticky note attached, for you to see when the time is right. I slid it into my pocket, feeling its weight. I flipped through the folders. Bank statements, property deeds, and printed emails filled each one. Some of the emails were from my stepmother, her words pushing for changes to my father's schedule, keeping me away. Others were from lawyers and business contacts, showing how she had tried to get control over his company. I glanced at the door, half expecting someone to appear. The house was still silent. I took the will, the flash drive, and the folders, placing them in my backpack. I closed the cabinet and locked it again, sliding the key back into my pocket. When I stepped outside, the cool night air hit me hard. I locked the front door behind me and walked quickly back to my car. My father hadn't left me with nothing. He had left me with a plan. And now I had proof. 2 days later, I sat in a small office across from a family lawyer. The place smelled faintly of coffee and paper. I laid the second will on the desk, along with the flash drive and a few of the printed emails. The lawyer put on his glasses and read in silence, his brow lifting slightly as he reached the end. He set the paper down and leaned back. "This is valid," he said. "If it's authentic and the witnesses can be verified, it overrides the earlier will completely." Relief started to rise in me, but he held up a hand. "You can't move too fast. If they don't know you have this, they'll keep acting like they've already won. That's when they make mistakes, and those mistakes will make this airtight in court." It made sense. If I confronted them now, they would have time to cover their tracks. If I stayed quiet, they might say or do something that could be used against them. I agreed to hold off on filing anything. For the next few days, I kept my distance. My stepmother posted photo after photo online, smiling at parties, holding wine glasses, even posing in my father's office like it was hers. My half-brother showed off expensive purchases, a new watch, designer clothes, a car he didn't need. They didn't hide their gloating. At night, I went through the flash drive. It held hours of video recordings. My father sat in the same chair each time, looking weaker with every clip. In one, he spoke directly to the camera. "If you're watching this," he said, "it means they tried to take what's not theirs. I've seen the way they move around me, the way they talk when they think I'm asleep. This will isn't for them. It's for you." He named them both, saying they had pushed him to sign papers he didn't understand at the time. In another recording, he described how they kept me away, how he regretted not telling me sooner. His voice was steady, even when his face looked tired. I copied the files to several drives, keeping one hidden in my apartment, one in a safe deposit box, and one with the lawyer. I printed transcripts of the recordings and matched them to the relevant emails, building a clear timeline. Each time I saw my stepmother's posts, I reminded myself that letting her celebrate now would make the fall that much harder later. Every smile she showed the world, every careless word my half-brother spoke online, was just another piece I could use. It wasn't easy to wait, but my father's words echoed in my mind. They'll never see it coming. And I planned to make sure of it. Within weeks, my stepmother started selling things my father had worked his whole life to build. The first was one of his rental property. A week later, the old vacation cabin was listed. She didn't wait for good offers. Everything was priced to move fast. It was obvious she wanted cash in hand. That cash didn't stay long. My half-brother flaunted it everywhere. New cars, expensive nights out, designer clothes he wore once before tossing aside. He posted photos of himself in front of the family business, arms spread wide like it was a trophy he had earned. The caption read, "Running the show now." The more they flaunted, the more reckless they became. At one party, my half-brother went live on social media. He was clearly drunk, a drink in one hand, music blasting in the background. He laughed into the camera, slurring, "Told you it'd be easy. Just had to get Dad to sign the papers before, you know." His friends laughed, but the words were clear enough. I saved that video before it could disappear. Every post, every careless brag, I took screenshots. I even recorded the videos on my own device in case they tried to delete them later. When the pattern became clear, I reached out to an investigative journalist I knew of from local news. I sent her copies of the public posts, along with tips about the rapid asset sales and the sudden shifts in ownership. She was interested right away. I didn't mention the will or the recordings yet. Those were still my strongest cards. While she started digging, my stepmother kept feeding her son's lifestyle. She transferred the business accounts into her name, then started liquidating some of its assets too. In less than a month, machines and equipment my father had held onto for years were gone. Some were sold far below market value to friends of hers. The journalist called me a week later. She had found buyers connected to questionable business practices and even linked one sale to someone under investigation for fraud. She told me she was close to finishing her piece, and when it went public, it would raise a lot of questions. I thanked her and stayed quiet online, letting them keep thinking I was out of the picture. My half-brother posted another late-night clip, this time bragging about how easy it is when you're family and mocking people who think they're entitled to stuff just because of blood. That one stung, but I saved it like all the others. Every careless word was another brick in the wall I was building against them. They didn't see it yet, but the ground under them was starting to crack, and I was going to be the one to make it collapse. The article came out on a Tuesday morning. I saw the headline before I even opened it. Local business tied to suspicious asset sales and possible elder manipulation. The journalist had done her work well. The story was detailed with timelines, financial records, and screenshots of my stepmother's transaction. There were even still images from my half-brother's drunken videos, his words printed underneath in bold text. The article didn't accuse them outright of crimes, but it left no doubt that something was wrong. And then came the part one hadn't expected. The journalist had included short clips from my father's recorded statement. His voice was clear, naming them both and explaining how they had kept me away. The public didn't need much more than that. Within hours, the comments section exploded. People shared the article on social media, tagging my stepmother's accounts. Old acquaintances, former employees, and complete strangers posted angry messages under her photos. Words like thief, liar, and manipulator appeared over and over. My half-brother wasn't spared either. Screenshots of his bragging posts and videos were circulating everywhere. People mocked his arrogance, pointing out how fast he had burned through what wasn't his. I stayed quiet. No posts. No comments. I didn't defend myself or join the crowd. I just watched as the tide turned, as people who had once congratulated her now demanded answers. Public sympathy shifted without me having to say a word. By the end of the day, my stepmother had turned her accounts private. The next morning, she deleted them altogether. But the screenshots were already everywhere. Local news picked up the story from the online article, adding their own coverage. A camera crew even showed up outside the family business, but the doors stayed locked. I heard through a mutual contact that she had hired a PR consultant to try to fix her image. She also called in 2 lawyers, one for the growing media problem, another to protect her assets. The problem was she didn't realize I still had the real weapon, the will. She stopped posting in public, but I knew she was panicking. It was in the way the business phone number suddenly went to voicemail, the way her friends' comments disappeared from old posts, the way my half-brother vanished from public view altogether. I kept every news clip, every repost of the article, every comment thread. They weren't just proof of the damage. They were part of the story I would tell in court. For the first time since the will reading, I felt the balance shift. She had built her victory on display for everyone to see. Now, piece by piece, it was crumbling in front of them all. And I was still just getting started. The courtroom was quiet except for the shuffle of papers and the sound of chairs scraping against the floor. I sat beside my lawyer at the front table, the second will placed neatly in front of him. Across the room, my stepmother and half-brother avoided looking at. She wore a stiff suit, her expression tight. He kept his eyes on the table, his jaw set. When the judge entered, everyone stood. Once we sat again, my lawyer began. He spoke clearly, laying out the facts step by step. The later will was presented first, along with proof of its authenticity, signatures verified by handwriting experts, witnesses confirming they had been present, and dates that clearly showed it replaced the earlier will. Then came the rest. Screenshots of social media posts, printed copies of the emails, and transcripts from my father's recorded statement. Each piece was explained, connected to the timeline, and backed with evidence from credible sources. The videos were played for the court, my father's voice describing how they had kept me away and pressured him into signing papers. I glanced at my stepmother during one of the clips. Her face was pale, her eyes fixed on the table. My half-brother leaned back in his chair, shifting uncomfortably. The lawyer for their side tried to object, but the judge allowed the evidence. When it came time for my lawyer's final move, he played the recording from the will. The sound of their laughter filled the courtroom, sharp and mocking. It was a small moment, but hearing it in that setting made it even more damning. The judge took her time before speaking. She read over the will once more, then addressed the court. The later document is valid and legally binding. The earlier will is hereby void. All claims by the respondents to the estate are dismissed. The words hung in the air for a moment. My lawyer nodded once, calm and steady, but I could feel the tension leaving my shoulders. Across from us, my stepmother's mouth tightened into a thin line. My half-brother muttered something under his breath, his face red. The judge added that the evidence of manipulation would be forwarded to the appropriate authorities for. She didn't accuse them directly of a crime, but the implication was clear. As we gathered our things, I could feel their eyes on me. I didn't look back. My lawyer placed a hand on my shoulder, guiding me toward the exit. The hallway outside felt brighter, the air lighter. They had walked into court expecting to keep what they had taken. Instead, they walked out with nothing. Not the house, not the business, not a single piece of what they had flaunted. And they knew now that the moment they laughed at me had helped seal their downfall. 2 weeks after the court ruling, the paperwork was complete. The estate was now in my name. The house, the business, the accounts. Everything they had claimed as theirs was officially mine. I didn't waste time. A notice went to my stepmother and half-brother, giving them 30 days to leave the house. There was no shouting, no threats. It was a legal order, signed and final. They tried to stall, but the law was on my side now. On the day they left, I didn't go to watch. I didn't need to see the moving truck or hear their complaints. All I wanted was the keys, which were delivered to me by the locksmith who changed the locks that same afternoon. Standing in the empty hallway, I walked through each room slowly. The furniture was gone, but traces of my father's presence remained. The smell of old books in the study, the faint scratches on the kitchen table where he used to sit. The business needed attention, too. I met with the employees who had stayed through the chaos, assuring them it would continue to run as my father intended. Their relief was clear. They had been waiting for stability to return. A few days later, I found myself back in the same lawyer's office where this had all started. The same heavy table, the same blinds letting in narrow lines of light. But this time, the air felt different. I wasn't tense. I wasn't bracing for humiliation. The lawyer slid a stack of papers toward me. "These finalize the transfer," he said. His tone was calm, but there was the faintest trace of a smile. I signed each page, my pen moving steadily. No hesitation, no second thoughts. When it was done, I set the pen down and sat for a moment. My eyes wandered to the same spot on the wall I had stared at during the will reading. Back then, I'd been holding back anger, trying not to let them see the hurt. Now there was only a quiet sense of completion. As I left the office, the sunlight hit my face. I thought of my father's voice in that hospital room, the way he had pressed the key into my hand and whispered, "They'll never see it coming." I finally understood what he had meant. This wasn't just about protecting what was his. It was about giving me the means to take it back in a way they could never predict. I walked to my car, the keys to both the house and the business in my pocket. No celebrations, no speeches. Just the knowledge that the fight was over, and that it had ended exactly the way my father had planned.